Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Hannah Broderud.
And I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Chris Province, and it is good to see you guys today.
It is.
Good to see you both here in the same space at the same time.
Right? Yeah.
Like a luxury these days.
It is, isn't it? It's awesome. So look forward to doing a lot more of this in 2023 as we head into a new year and always iterating, our topics. And, I thought that's, what a great thing to come together and talk about today as we're kind of entering a new year, a new season. Taking some time, and I think it aligns very well with a lot of coaching technique, right? In that we look back to reflect and take our key learnings away from a certain season or a certain time period, and then we look forward and say, okay, where am I going next, and what do I need to carry with me from where I've been that's helpful, right? And what are the things that I might have carried with me up to this point that are not helpful? What are those things that I need to release, right? And to help me stay on trajectory for next year. So I thought we'd do a little bit of year in review for 22 and a little bit of maybe vision casting for 23, and whether that's personally or professionally. So let's jump right into it. And thinking about, 2022, I think my first question is, looking back at it, what was your focus for last year going into it? And what did you learn about that area of focus as you traverse the year with that top of mind?
Yeah, I can start on that. I know several of us identify kind of a words or a theme going into each year. And for me in 2022, my word was creativity. I felt like I had spent a couple years, and some of this is due to the pandemic and some of it's due to us, starting this project together that is Purpose and Performance Group and working really hard on that. I had just spent several years on execution and just, hey, what needs to be done? What has to be done today? What has to be done this week? And that does require some level of creativity. That solving any problem is an exercise in creativity, but I think of creativity as kind of big C creativity and little c creativity. And little c creativity, I think we do all the time. And for me, solving a problem for a client is an exercise in creativity. Developing our internal team and our business is an exercise in creativity. But for 2022, I wanted to set aside more space for big C creativity, for creating things, whether that was through the written word or through visual media or through thinking about concepts differently. I think it can be conceptual and building a new model that organizations can use and thinking about things in a new way. So when I look back on the year, I give myself maybe a C+ or a B- on having time to focus on that. I think the year or two before that, I did not focus as much on it. So I did see growth, but it's also something that I want to take with me into 2023. Now, I have a new word for 2023 that I think we'll talk about in a little bit, but I think continuing to hold creativity top of mind for myself and look for ways to express creativity and practice creativity is good. And why I do all of that, my personal purpose is to invite people and teams into what's next for them. And I'm best at that when I am really living out every aspect of who I am. And I do identify as a creative, and I am at my best when I'm having time to do some of that big C creativity through some sort of medium that's not just showing up and consulting or coaching, which yes, that's creative, but I need some of that kind of introvert artist space to be at my best. And so, yeah, I'm going to carry that forward with me as well. And I'm curious from you guys, if that word showed up, what you saw, if you're like, oh my gosh, complete surprise, or hey, no, I did see some creativity, seeping out of you a little bit in the last year in a different way.
Yeah, Luke, I've definitely seen the creativity show up for you this year. I've always known intuitively that you're a creative person, but in the time that we've been working together this year, I've definitely seen that come out both visually, and you've created some really cool visuals, just the way you put things together and hand draw things, because you're not only creative, you also have artistic ability, like you actually can draw and visualize things. So both when it comes to new and different ways of visualizing concepts and making it real and tangible, both for our team and for the audiences that we serve. Definitely ways that I can connect with really meaningfully. So I've appreciated that. And also your ability to, even when we are at a client site, of just kind of taking ideas and concepts and pulling them together and creating some kind of output that is aesthetically pleasing and also ordered and connects in a way. And I know one of your core values is design or aesthetics, and I see the way you put things together is very intentional, and that sense for design and visually pleasing ways to connect a message, connecting ideas and concepts and helping people track with them. I've seen you show up on video a lot more in recent months. If you don't follow Luke on TikTok, you should definitely go check it out. He's got some really cool daily videos. I've seen it in some of your podcast episodes with, just Luke showing up, being, creating new art through words. So, great growth in that area. And I've appreciated seeing that side of you come out more.
Yeah, I think it also showed up in, as we've done instructional design, as well as we've continued to iterate our development programs. And just in the boldness of saying leadership development doesn't belong in a single bucket. And to be able to say, we lead ourselves, we learn how to lead teams, we learn how to lead and develop leaders, and we learn how to develop and lead organizations. And those are not the same discipline. And the creativity and kind of the artistry around recognizing that to do leadership development in a helpful way, it's required that we take some time and space to do it correctly. And I would posit that if organizations started with lead yourself and treated everyone in the organization as a leader, regardless of title, immediately we're better off.
Yeah.
And, historically, it's all been, here's this leadership development program, and it's this everything kludged together, but not taking our time to actually develop the concepts required to become something better, which is a big, it's an axe that we grind against the training industry, right? Training is an event that typically has little long-term value unless it's technical in nature. Education and development is a process, and we don't commit to development and education for 4 months or 6 months or a year. Development and education is a journey that we're on, both ourselves, our teams, and our organizations for the length of our career. So I think there's a lot of artistry in the boldness and the framework that we go to market with that basically differentiates us from every training organization out there.
Yeah. And learning is not an event, it is a process. And learning, in fact, is a creative process. Every time we learn something new, and we don't learn something just by taking in information and by reading something or by hearing something once, right? It's a process of practicing new behaviors. And when that happens, new connections are created in the brain, and the brain is literally creating new mass, new pathways. And so to tie that back into your concept of creativity, Luke, everything we do requires creativity because learning itself is inherently creative, right? So for us, that means creating the space for others to learn and to tap into their brain's creative power of learning and expanding and developing new behaviors, new habits, new ways of thinking.
Yeah, and just to kind of put a future spin on this, whether people identify as a creative or not, I think the future really belongs to people who are able to do creative work, because, with the new AI models that are coming out, even knowledge work, which a lot of people have really hung their hat on, I think, I don't want to say it's under threat. I don't think that's the right word, but it's going to change. And taking something like an AI tool that will write a book for you, like taking that raw material and turning it into something that has value, is mostly a creative project and less a knowledge product. Now, do you need to be a subject matter expert? Yes, but you're going to be much more productive if you can view that as a creative process in applying subject matter expertise to the commodity of the words that get spit out 80% of the way done, right? Then if you are going to stay in your old models. So that's a little bit of futurism for you there. But I think if we don't understand creativity and how creativity works, like that's a gap that people might want to think about focusing on for the next year.
Yeah, I want to kind of put let's pull thread here. Like, what is, when we talk about empirical or academic research, it is looking at things that are already known and putting different perspective on them and then testing the perspective. Maybe it's combining multiple things that are known into a new application, or a blended application of two different concepts to develop a new line of research and thought. But with the speed at which we can develop knowledge now, isn't there absolutely value in that the creativity of looking at something that's known and maybe multiple things that are known and applying those things in new ways? And in that, can we all be artists in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And the science of creativity is that creativity doesn't exist without constraints. And so it's impossible to find a creative solution to something without constraints and boundaries. And so half of the work of creativity is designing the right boundaries and constraints and getting clear enough about your boundaries and constraints that you can creatively solve problems within them. And so, what you're saying is, okay, we've got all of the knowledge of the world at our fingertips. How do we take concepts and what science knows about leadership, or what it knows about engineering, or what it knows about coding, whatever it is, and using that knowledge to solve a novel problem? Mm-hmm. And so I think, a great place to start is, what are the problems we're solving, and how do we get really clear about what we're trying to solve? Because that's a doorway to creativity. The other is, how do we learn exercises to spark our creative thinking? Because a great exercise is saying, okay, the problem we're trying to solve is, let's just say that there isn't a charging network to enable the uptake of electric vehicles, across the US. okay, that's what we're trying to solve. So let's deep dive into the science of honeybees, right? And are there principles there that we can apply to creating an EV network? Now, I've never done that exercise before, completely off the top of my head, but being able to dig in, write some bullet points about what is it that we know about honeybees and how they're effective and what networks they build and how do we apply that, right? Maybe it's something about hexagons, since honeycombs are built out of hexagons. Is there anything we can learn about hexagons that help us more rapidly build a charging network? I don't know, right? But that's the type of exercise.
There's so much about bees, and even bee language and communication is a whole science in and of itself. Like that, there's a lot of principles that can be gleaned from that. And just that whole idea of taking lessons from nature. You know, I recently reviewed the podcast episode with Dr. Brooke Loneman of social ecological systems and applying systems thinking from nature to business. You know, that's what you're talking about. I get fired up about that. Like that gets my creative juices flowing.
And I think the point there is, if you're uncomfortable with just hearing that layout of the idea, like that would be something to think about in the next year, because I think a few years down the road, we're all going to be asked to solve problems in that way, even if in the past we've done a more traditional knowledge work job where we just apply our subject matter expertise to problems, because AI is going to do a ton of that for us.
Yeah. And I think I'll just kind of wrap it up and say, there's a lot of value in applying what we know about human systems to learn about natural systems. There's a lot of value in applying what we know about individual behavioral modification to organizational modification and vice versa, right? So when we start thinking about how do these different dynamics play out in animal systems or human systems, or individual versus team or organizational dynamics, there's so much there left to explore. There's not a machine on earth that's going to do that for us. So
right.
A lot of that creativity in mind. I want to get to Hannah and say, Hannah, kind of thinking about your 22, your theme going in, how did all that play out and where do you set today?
Yeah, so my word going into 2022 was expansion or expansiveness. And I was kind of thinking about this a little bit earlier, because in some ways I didn't necessarily feel that I expanded in some of the ways that I had expected. But there was a lot of expansion that happened on a personal level. And really, it was a year for me that was full of a lot of personal change and really leaning into family. I have, I have a relationship that brought, some young people into my life that are part of my family now. And that's been a really awesome experience to just kind of lean into and building bonds with new people. Towards the end of the year here, I got a dog too. So I'm kind of like leaning into this family life and expanding my personal circle, right? So that's been really meaningful. But then when I look at the work that I've been doing this year, right? I learned a lot of things about the importance of cultivating space. And we had Lorca Smetana on the podcast early in the year, and I had gone through a workshop with her. So she's a resilience researcher, and just the importance of one of the things I took from that workshop was really this concept of cultivating spaces, physical spaces, spaciousness, these different concepts, and they've been kind of playing in my mind. And I've been sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally really exploring what that actually means, right? Expanding the space around me, the margins, the physical spaces that I work in, play in, live in, facilitate in? What does it mean to create meaningful space that sparks creativity, that enables us to focus and do meaningful work? And then the concept of spaciousness, which is really for me, freedom, being able to feel like I'm not constricted, right? So I know when you talk about creativity, Luke, there are constraints. And so, yeah, my little space here at my desk is not very large. And yet I can create spaciousness around me by how I arrange that space, when I'm here, what kind of mind space I'm in, right? So all these concepts around spaciousness have been how that word expansiveness or expansion have really taken shape, right? And it's not necessarily about having a bigger space or more space. It's about how we use space. And I talk about space both physically and metaphorically, right? So how do we create space for reflection, right? That's been a theme in my life for several years. And as life has changed and there's been shifts, some of the space that I used to have or occupy hasn't been there. And I'm having to find new ways to create space for reflection, for example. So kind of towards the end of the year, getting back to my practices of daily reflection, connecting with myself first so I can more meaningfully connect with others. That's kind of come full circle this year, right? From kind of everything is new and different at the beginning of the year, lots of change, to coming back to myself and connecting back to the space of me, my heart space, my mind space, and then finding ways to connect in more meaningful ways with other people.
Yeah, and I think where I'll speak to where I've seen that show up, Hannah, just so much amazing and awesome feedback from our development cohorts, where like that approach and that mindset about what are we really doing here? When we come together to learn and develop as a cohort, how are we entering this space? How are we arriving in this space? Kind of taking that breath when we first get there to get all that other stuff out and come here to do what we're here to do, because this organization cares enough to create this space for us to share. And that perspective, and I think that mindset translates in very meaningful ways to the people that are part of your developmental cohorts. So I just want to pass that along and say, like, that's one way that I've seen that really show out this year.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think about some of the conversations we're having with clients where we're saying, hey, we need to get back to our annual planning cadence. It's that time of year. We've been doing monthly follow-ups, some quarterly cadences, but hey, it's time to really get away for a couple days. And just your advocacy for explaining to people why it's important to actually leave site, leave premises, and be in a different space, because a different physical space does bring a different mind space and does bring a different pace and the ability to really chew on what is most important and connect with one another in new ways that aren't just the familiar, well-trodden pathways. And so I think of that. And then I also think about being a guest of yours so much this last year. So people don't know, I stay in Hannah's guest room most of the time when I'm up in Montana doing projects together. And Hannah is great at hospitality. And so, Hannah, I just thank you for that. And the spaces that you create, I think, in your home are really indicative of the intentionality that you bring to, like Chris was saying, workshops and creating space for people to learn and to be and to reflect and to grow. And I love that that's holistic and in your personal space and in your space when you're hosting, and then also when we're doing development work with people, creating learning spaces, even in their physical sites, we can still create a new sense of space.
Well, and that was another, meaningful expansion for me this year, was to expand the work that we do into the local area where I live in Montana, right? And yeah, I've done work here on and off, but most of my focus with Purpose and Performance Group and our client partners before this year had been in other regions, other markets, other physical spaces, right? So being able to do this meaningful work while being really deeply connected to this community that I now live in. In 2021, I moved from Bozeman to Big Sky, Montana, and really expanding my own personal life here, but also being able to bring our work with us to clients here in this area. That's been a very meaningful expansion, which wasn't an expansion outward per se. It was an expansion inward inside this area. And I think of expansion in lots of ways, right? You can expand out through more reach. You can expand in through deeper connection. And that's really the mode that I'm in and that I'm entering 2023 with.
Well, and I think the message there is the more we know our personal purpose, the more we know the highest good we can bring to the world, the more expansive we can be standing in line at the grocery store or at the board meeting or working with a direct report. Our own clarity and confidence is an expansive exercise and gives us, we hold multitudes, right? There are lots of different ways that we can show up. And the more clear we are and the more confident we are about what our unique value proposition is, what our unique purpose is, the more powerful people feel that, and the more they experience it, and the more positive impact we can have in all of those little micro interactions all the time. And so I think what you're talking about, this feeling of personal expansiveness, everyone has access to that, but it does take reflection and focus and intentionality.
Yeah.
And much agreed. And, if I want to jump into kind of reflecting on 22 myself, I didn't enter 22 trying to set the world on fire. After kind of the blow up of 2020 and then in 21, everything running like so white hot that we knew that it was just such a false environment. Everyone, like, there was just so much cash in the marketplace. Enterprise-driven organizations were basically just raking that in, right, in the midst of a lot of challenges, like supply chain and offshoring and all the other things that were part of 2021. But we knew that was a false environment. So entering 22, this idea of reestablishing an understanding of what is true about like just what's happening, society, marketplace, all the things that really inform our organizational behaviors. So it really felt a lot like a year of observation where I wasn't trying to make a lot happen. I was just trying to figure out what was true, like what is current state. I can't go anywhere if I don't know where I am. And I think that was true, professionally, like with our client partners. That's true personally, as I continue to answer all the questions that were raised during 20 and 21 about like, are my time, resources, and talents being used effectively? Who gets my attention, my affirmations, and affection? Like, are those being distributed appropriately? Like, continuing to try to answer all those while monitoring a lot of economic condition, things like consumer confidence, inflation, obviously, is a huge topic. But things like savings rates, we've seen the personal savings rate move from, almost 9% down to 2.5% as of November. So those personal savings rates keep coming down. Credit usage is up 15% in an environment with higher interest rates. Now I start to get a picture of like, okay, this feels more normal from a historical perspective, right? We had this crazy cash rich sort of economy in 21 that continued to deplete over 22. And now I can tell that story, right? And I know where we're at. People are not saving money. They're spending what they have. We know that discretionary dollars for lower income earners are much less now than what they were a year ago. So you're seeing kind of a picture emerge that's probably more truthful, and then we'll ride some other wave where, savings will increase again and credit card usage will decline. But it's not going to, it shouldn't be precluded with so much disruption like what we had in 2020.
Yeah, Chris, what you're saying resonates, and I'm going to connect it to this idea of the Kubler-Ross change cycle, because it's really been top of mind for me. And so if people don't know what that is, it really is how we process change and how we move from denial of change to integrating with the change and it becoming a part of our normal day-to-day life. If you Google the grief cycle, that's really where the Kubler-Ross change cycle or change curve became popularized. But the steps are pretty simple. People get a boost of energy when they're in that denial phase. And so they try and do all of these things to deny the change, to counteract the change, to fight against the change. And then there's typically a depressive kind of period of time where energy level goes down, 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 as there's like, oh, I can't fight against this. What I'm trying to do to fight against this isn't working. I guess maybe this is true, into this space where energy levels are really low. Eventually we accept this is new reality. And then there's kind of a long, slow climb out where eventually we integrate the new reality with our life and who we are and our expectations for daily life and the status quo. And our energy levels rise as we learn, right? We've accepted this as new. And then there's just this long process of learning and integration. And why I say that, Chris, is because part of the challenge, I believe, in determining what is true and what is not true is identifying what are the energy bursts that are in response to new reality and trying to fight against new reality. So really these denial energy bursts, and what truly are integrative changes and steps that are happening. And the other challenge is that all of these different change cycles going through these phases of change, they're different for individuals, they're different for organizations, and then they're different for the broader culture and society. And we see different things happening at different levels, all the time and concurrently. And I think for a lot of us in 2020, like there was some pretty quick denial activity, to the pandemic. Oh gosh, some people are having to work from home. People have to wear masks, whatever. Pretty quick denial, then low depressive state, and then integration. That might have happened in the period of 2 or 3 months for some people. But organizations, I feel like in 2022, we have seen a lot of acceptance, and 2023 is going to be really characterized by integration and normalization. But culturally, it moves slower. So we look at the country, and I think a lot of times the things that are happening politically, things that are happening in large kind of population-sized groups still can be in that denial phase. It's going to take a long time to move towards integration with some of the change that we've seen. And so it is like the water is muddy and cloudy, and discerning our way through all of that different change and how people are digesting and accepting that change is really complex.
Yeah, I kind of liken this last year to walking along a river bottom, where you're trying to, like, is this rock going to be stable enough for me to take the next step on? And then you fill out, like, is this right? Like, what is true? What's going to hold me? What's going to provide support? Basically, what is the new foundation? And, here's the thing. During 21 and parts of 22, the market was so flush that a lot of enterprises didn't have to do a lot of things right in order to collect the market rents.
Yeah.
Right. We've got, portions of businesses are just closed, or we operate the main area, but not the bar. We operate the bar, not the main area. We do to go only, or we do dine in only, or we do, just different, like, businesses were able to look different and still collect the rents. And, now towards the end of 22, you're seeing a return to traditional competitive nature and competitive factors where we're not able to functionally do that, because the enterprises that have jumped the gun and said, we're going to return to excellence, are now way ahead of the people that have accepted that eroded standard. So operational standards have eroded. I mean, I think as consumers, we can all see it. We accept crap service and sometimes crap product, and we still pay for it. And enterprises have said, okay, like, our business is healthy. We're trying to reestablish our footing. Well, now these first movers are out there saying, we're going to drive towards returning to high operating standards. And they're getting a major jump on their competition. And so I'll kind of kick us off looking into 23. As much as 22 was about reestablishing, understanding what's true, and defining, like, an actual current state, for me, 23 is very much about returning to excellence and, like, reestablishing operating principles that create excellent organizations, excellent enterprise, and at the end of the day, profit. And it's really getting back to basics and saying, starting with that top folder and saying, what are we doing here? Well, we build relationship with team members, we build relationship with customers, we steward our physical asset where these transactions take place, and we manage and develop our inventories, right? Like, top folder, that's what we do in business. Now, getting to the next folder, it's, do we have that authentic purpose? Are we accountable to it? Are we measuring what matters? Do we have an inclusive communications model? Do we develop people in teams? Do we have really functional recognition programs? There's that second folder. Then we, on and on from there. But let's start at that top folder, kind of getting back to Hannah's idea of, we create space, right, to connect and do things. Well, what are the things we're doing within the spaces that we have? Those four kind of tenets. Let's get back to this and say, we can be excellent. We don't have to accept the operating standards that have been delivered due to supply chain disruption, inflation, crushing market demand, lack of labor. Now let's just call these things excuses. Okay. And just say, like, COVID now we might still get COVID, but COVID from a business impact, like, we have to say it's over and we have to work around it, because we have to be excellent. Like, there's something about, and this is, like, becoming better. It goes back to becoming better being a moral imperative. We talked about on the podcast, like, being resilient is a moral imperative. I've kind of internalized that to say, becoming better is the moral imperative, because that's the only way I leverage the gifts I've been given. If I have these gifts, if I have the number one, the gift of being here, being on the right side of the ground today, like, how do I honor that gift? How do I honor the areas that I can excel in? And if I don't use my gifts to become better, create better teams, support organizations, then I'm cheating myself, and I'm cheating everyone that's ever invested in me to help me. So, that's kind of, I want to get back to honoring our gifts and just embracing what it means to be human and be part of communities, teams, families, organizations, and go compete and win.
Yeah, that's pretty inspiring. And for me, embracing excellence, getting back to excellence, what that means for me personally, the word I'm choosing for 2023 is cultivation. So as Luke alluded to, I like to grow things. So in my home, there are a lot of plants, a lot of green plants. I have a lot of house plants. I love to.
There are a lot of plants.
Yes. So the reason I love plants is because I can watch them grow, right? I tend to them, I take care of them. I provide they kind of take care of themselves as long as they have adequate light and water and some nutrition, right? They're a lot easier to raise than children or animals, but it does require some level of attention and intention. And so when I think about what it means to grow things, and this has been a theme in my life too, but I'm going to put some intentional focus around, I talked about space earlier, cultivating space, cultivating spaces, cultivating relationships, right? Both new relationships and cultivating and growing existing relationships. That means both personal relationships and business relationships, right? Finding ways to cultivate and grow revenue for our client partners and for our own team. So all these different themes of cultivation, which is really about enabling or providing the environment in which things can grow, right? You don't actually make anything grow. What we can do is create the right conditions where growth can happen. And so that's really going to be my focus, both personally and professionally this year, is cultivation, creating conditions for growth.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm curious, Hannah, practically, what does that look like as far as focus, and like, how are you going to use time differently in 23 around that theme?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's one that I'm actually here in the last couple of days of the year as we're recording this episode. And that's kind of where some of my focus is, to think about, how do I organize my time? How do I manage my energy? How do I put the right level of focus on the right things, so that I can create those conditions for growth, right? So a big part of that for me is kind of getting back to those personal practices of daily reflection, of not just reacting to whatever happens in the day, but being intentional about how I proactively use my time to focus on the important things, not just the urgent things, and also not just letting things become urgent. It also means thinking about, so when it comes to cultivating relationships, right? What are new relationships that might be strategic or meaningful in different ways to build? But with that comes not neglecting existing relationships, right? So how do I reconnect, reach back to the people that are already in my circle, to the networks that I'm part of or have been part of? How do I tap back into those relationships and cultivate them, put conditions in place to help them grow? A lot of that is my own intentional ways of reaching out, connecting with people, having coffee, having meaningful conversation. And, those are things that make me feel alive and that I'm growing. And if I can extend that out to other people and we can grow relationships together, I think for me, that means I'm living my purpose, and that's really meaningful. So back to your question of how will I spend my time differently, I think setting aside that time to really think about where do I need to put some intentional focus on cultivating growth, and how do I do that in meaningful ways? And then actually planning that into my days and my weeks.
Yeah, I want to throw something out here relative to intentionality as well. I think science tells us we can have somewhere around 150 meaningful relationships, right? And I think when I look at how we manage relationships in enterprise world, right, it's all around contact cycles, right? So if I have 400 people I'm responsible to have relationships with, I'm somewhere at about a 60-day contact cycle if all I do is connect with people. Right. So think about us all that have other things to do other than contact people. I think it's helpful to think about, I'm going to drive some intention to this. And you guys can say that's batshit crazy, or you can say, yeah, I think that'd be helpful. But who's my 150? Who are my top 150 relationships? And then out of those, what are the 20 that I'm going to be hyper intentional about? Those contact cycles, the support, just the cadence that I keep with those, top 20 people. And tell me how next year would look differently if we did that exercise. And if it's helpful, then what keeps us from doing it?
I love that, Chris. And in fact, I'm gonna do that exercise because I think, it goes back to something else that I've been really kind of spending some time reflecting on this year, which is energy management, right? So who and what deserve my best energy? And the who are really those 150. That's about as many as our brain can really handle and keep track of, right? I'm actually going to sit down and make a list and think about what are meaningful ways to cultivate these relationships, right? And for some of those relationships, that means frequency and quantity of contact. For others, it's not necessarily that you're connecting with them on a regular daily basis, but what are meaningful ways to reach back out and reconnect with some of those 150. I love it. I'm going to do it.
Awesome. I think, as am I. And I think I just need to go see some people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few people on my really important list that I haven't seen in a while. Mm-hmm. And I need to go have lunch with them, or maybe take the family to around where they live for a weekend. And
for example, Big Sky, Montana, right? I mean, there's some people here that you haven't seen in a while, or that you've never even met that you should know.
That's a great example, right? And I think we're trying to work something out for just to kick off the year that way. But I think about, getting up to see Sam Dutro or some friends I have down south, and just shaking some hands, people on our team, right? Jonathan, Brandy, these are people that I don't get to see, so I think just, again, they're top 20, right? So making sure that I'm getting that time that we grow our relationship and not just maintain that status quo. So anyway, I just thought maybe bring some intention around this idea that you're speaking to, Hannah, and hopefully it's provides some utility to folks listening. So Luke, where are you headed in 23?
So a lot of the same themes that you all both mentioned. For me, my word is reach. And I'll tell you a little bit about why. Partly my personal journey, embarking on, what does it mean to help organizations be successful and grow? And rather than focusing that on one organization as an employee, really bringing that focus to multiple organizations as clients. That's been a 5-year journey. And here I am, COVID happened in the middle of that, and we've built a team along the way. And what I couldn't tell you 4 or 5 years ago And I remember one of our first proposals we did, the person came back and said, okay, I see all this and like, I like you, but what actually do you do? And I remember we sat around in the office, we were like, well, like what? I don't really know how to answer this person. And that's not where we are right now. I think especially the last couple of years, we've gotten a lot of clarity around who we're really good with, what value we bring, and what is it that we do. I mean, we can say right now, hey, if you are a Native American owned enterprise, or if you are a private business with somewhere between 5 and 90 million in revenue, we are probably in the top 5% of practitioners to help you with things like strategic planning, developing leaders, coaching your senior leadership team through focusing on top priorities month in, month out, so that you can win as an organization and fulfill your purpose. Purpose creation, values, refresh, or creation, I'm super confident we're in the top 5% of practitioners. And that wasn't true 4 years ago, to be able to say those are the things we do, with whom we do them, and we're really good at it. And so for me, now that we're there, 2023, it's like, okay, how do we share the story? And rather than sharing it with one-off, hey, here's a lead, here's a proposal we need to write, here's someone we need to get coffee with, I want to really be intentional about how do we do distribution network node relationship building instead of just one-off relationship building. And obviously I'll always have coffee with anyone, but being really intentional about how do we build a network that gets the word out. And that's really exciting. It's a little bit scary because it is a new chapter for us and for me personally, but it's also exciting because we talk about hope is a vision for the future, plus a pathway to get there, plus the ability to dedicate energy to it. And I think we have really great hope that reach is something we can execute on in the next year. So that's me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think through this focus on, reach, cultivation, returning to excellence, I mean, we have some lofty aspirations, for this year. But it's striking, like, how much confidence I have that each one of us will accomplish exactly what we set in front of us. Like, none of these are out of reach. Everything is achievable. And, it's awesome to be on this journey with you guys, to just be able to check in. How's this going? Paint all of these ideas into what we develop as an organization and what we take to market, and continue to learn and grow together. So as always, I just appreciate your all's perspective. You're speaking into the different factors that, just kind of play out in my life and helping me be better. And I hope that our listeners feel the same way. So thank you all for some reflection on 22 and casting some vision for where our heads might be in 23. And we encourage all of our listeners to join us in this practice and really head into this year with a lot of clarity so that we can accomplish exactly those things set before us. So until next time, thank you, Luke. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you all for listening and joining us here on Magic in the Room.
Have a great 2023.
And if you want to reach us and connect with us, you can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com and on various social media outlets. Have a great 2023. We look forward to connecting with you in this year ahead.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.